Welcome to our webinar this morning on technology and its use in cycling. Um, at Cyclologic, we've become somewhat well known for being the people who are very pro-technology. As a kind of a preamble to that, one thing I'd like to say is that technology is super important in terms of being able to get more repeatable information and more accurate information. But technology without a good underpinning of biomechanics, human anatomy, and all of the other parameters that we normally look at, can be a misleading way to go. Just wanted to check, I'm seeing here on the screen that a lot of people are connecting to audio. Aidan and Matthew, can you hear us? Just want to make sure that looks like a lot of people are connecting right now. But I just want to make sure you can hear us. Okay, it looks like a lot of people are still connecting. All right, from Victor, Sarah can hear us. What about Aidan? Matt looks like he's connected. Luis is, okay, good. Looks like everybody's connecting. All righty, well, I'm excited to talk to everybody today about technology. Like I said, technology is a huge part of what we do. We are very technology centric. And part of the reason for that, I'm going to tell you a story about technology and why I originally got interested in that. It was 2002 or 2003, and I was working in a retail setting, or in a retail setting. And part of me working in that retail setting meant that, I fit a lot of clients, but at the time in the early 2000s, there wasn't a lot of technology. And I remember the local coach in the Arizona area got a dartfish system. And I remember we went through a series of weeks where people came in with their bikes, and funnily enough, they had all of this similar kind of sheepish grin on their face where they were like, well, I went and got this fit because this person had this really cool technology, and I'm not comfortable. What you did with me was amazing. I felt great. Can you put my bike back the way it was? So that was really interesting for me. But after a few months, it began to get irritating. And it got irritating because, first of all, I had to do a lot of redos. I had to either bring people back in the fit studio and fix it, or I had to do, take time away from fitting and put their fit dimensions back on the bike, change stems, do all that. But it became sufficiently irritating that what I decided to do was, well, if you can't beat them, you need to join them. And that started possibly the most humbling period I had as a bike fitter. And, at the time we'd fit classics winners, we'd fit Tour de France podium finishers. I'd worked at a very high level as a coach and as a bike fitter. And I was pretty confident everything I did was beyond reproach. In any case, my humbling moment was when I took what I thought was my finely calibrated eye and I added video into the mix. I wasn't doing it because I felt I needed video or I needed to be able to do that kind of analysis or mark joints or, look at kinematics. I was doing it because it was irritating me that somebody else was taking business from us and we were being perceived as less high tech. And when I started to shoot video, the humbling part of it was, 90 something percent of the time, I think I was pretty on the money. But then there were significant periods of time where either I saw a nuance with the person moving that I didn't see with my eye, and we're going to talk about the why of that, or I was in a situation where this was just a customer or client that I had a communication issue with, or I thought I was communicating well, but once I had the benefit of video, I was able to communicate much better. So it helped me see things in much more depth. It helped me measure things I couldn't measure. And it showed me some things that, I was definitely subject to what I would call observer bias. And observer bias is when you make a change in a bike fit and you're convinced, oh my goodness, knee tracking has improved. And then you analyze it and you go, well, no, actually, maybe it's changed a tiny bit, but it hasn't actually changed very much. So for me, that was a kind of a humbling experience because here was me thinking I was nailing it all the time, and I wasn't. And that was a pure ego thing for me that I had to to manage. So we're going to look at this use of technology from a number of different standpoints. And so for me, the thing about technology is good technology expands your senses. It makes you better able to see what's going on. And as you'll see in this presentation, also how you communicate what's going on to your clients. As a bike fitter, part of your role is you fundamentally have a duty to shift your client's proprioceptive awareness, to shift their awareness of what they're doing. We're going to talk about the role of technology in a fit, and our spoiler alert on that is, of course, it doesn't replace you. As a fitter, you are the highest value add in the process. You are the most important thing. What are the current options in technology? What kind of choices do you make as a bike fitter? And then what are the future directions for tech in bike fitting? So, and just one thing I want to say before we go into the next slide is that if you haven't been using technology and you're a successful fitter, or if you're using technology in a limited fashion, one thing that I want to say is that you've built an amazing foundation to be able to, when you add technology, to step yourself up to a higher level again. So I don't want anybody to think we're coming at technology saying if you're not using it, you're not a successful fitter or you're not a good fitter. But I would say that in my experience over the last 30 years of doing this, when you're able to add more reproducible elements and you already have a good eye for what you want to see, technology will change your world for sure. Okay, so let's move on. So we're going to look at technology under these 7 critical categories. The first category is human limitations, or to be more succinct, to overcome human limitations we have. And that's the limitations of our senses. So we said at the onset of this that it's about extending your senses. But what we want to do is also cancel out some of the limitations of our perception. We're going to talk about technology from an accuracy standpoint. So from an accuracy standpoint, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is to determine where a person is within a set of ranges. The more accurately we're able to determine those ranges, the more accurately we're going to be able to manage the outcomes of an intervention. So if we decide to make a change and we can accurately measure the outcome of that change, it makes a huge difference. The next thing is market expectations, and we'll talk about the perceptions of your consumers and technology. The customer experience. You'll see some pictures of our fit studios and how we've integrated technology into that customer experience. So from a customer experience standpoint, we really want to make sure that technology and the experience are well aligned. So technology is not a one-sided thing, it needs to face both ways, and we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about time savings with technology, or the paradox of time savings with technology. Our 6th and penultimate category is trust and credibility. So when we make the process transparent using technology, your ability to build trust and credibility is fundamentally changed. And then the final thing, and a very important thing if you're going to see clients on an ongoing basis, is how technology augments your record keeping and how it helps you deal with this client after multiple appointments and over a period of weeks, months, or years. So let's talk about the human limitations component first. So the human eye struggles to capture detail in rapidly moving objects. I once upon a time did a long search looking for, what the frame rate of the human eye is. And Andy and I were looking for citations for this, and we struggled to find a citation. But when I looked at it originally, the approximate, and the human eye doesn't work like a camera, but if they were to approximate it, the range that I saw in the research was between 16 and 30 or 28 frames a second, the human eye works. So let's just go at the low end of that scale for a second and think about us looking at things. If we went to the low end of the scale and said it was in the teens, that means if you're watching somebody pedaling at 540 degrees a second, i.e. 90 RPMs, so if a pedal stroke is 360 degrees and we do 1.5 pedal strokes in a second, what that means is if you're in the mid-teens with the kind of frame rate of your eye, you're seeing things in about 30-degree chunks. If your eye is calibrated and works much faster than that, you're seeing things in 15-degree chunks in the pedal stroke. So you're seeing 15 to 30-degree chunks. And then the brain stitches all that together and makes it look like you're seeing HD video, but there are limitations in what you can see. You can train yourself to observe at a very high degree of fidelity, but it's challenging. And when you start using video or 3D or any sort of kinematic analysis tool, sometimes the results of your perception of what you see, especially in people with long legs, the perception versus the reality can sometimes be off. As a human being, you can't clone yourself and put yourself on both sides of the rider or all four sides of a rider and look and see what's happening. So you can only observe one side of the rider at a time. We talked a little bit about observer bias. Observer bias is when you're trying to manifest an outcome, you're generally a little bit invested emotionally or egotistically in, well, I'm trying to fix parameter X, I've made intervention Y, and you want to see what you want to see. And it's still something that I struggle with in bike fit, because there are times where I'm so sure something I've done in a bike fit or in a wind tunnel or trackside testing, we're going to get the following result, and that's not always what happens. So it helps you manage observer bias when you are using technology. And then the final point here is that a lot of the discomforts that our clients experience are subjective, because some people experience pain different to others. So for example, I dealt with a cyclist yesterday that's had one bike, has had one saddle, and one bike fit for 3 years, and they're a new cyclist. Their perception of what was happening with their saddle was, this is normal, I can manage it. When I pressure mapped it, it looked like the Japanese flag was right in the middle of her soft tissue area in the saddle. Now, straight away for me, that was a red flag. For that particular client, that was like, well, this is what my saddle feels like, and I just manage it, this is cycling. So sometimes us listening and communicating with a customer isn't enough. We need to be able to quantify what's going on and measure it, and that can be helpful. So when we go beyond, looking at a person and deciding whether we like something or not, when we're able to quantify that, they have a certain ankling pattern, when we're able to observe what's happening with the client, and we go beyond that. So if I want to look at, what posture is like, if I want to measure ankling patterns, if I have a concern about what they're doing with their wrist or what any other parameter on the bike, when I'm able to visually show that person, here's what's happening, here's what the angles are, and you can see on the left-hand side, we have a library of all of the things that are going on. It really allows us to dial in and say, all right, this is what's going on, this is what's happening, and then when I make a change, we're able to empirically see how something has changed. So it's not that it'll necessarily change what you do, but at least the client is following you. And one of the big, largest, most powerful things about technology is if you bring that client on a journey with you side by side, now that client's more invested in, well, I'm not going to whip out the Allen key because this feels different. Now when they think back to you saying to them, you know what, your hamstrings are going to be under a different amount of stress and pressure, your quads might fire differently because of all the things we've changed, and you're going to feel like potentially you've less power. When they know that you base that decision on angles, and when you base that on an empirical process, rather than you just looking at something on a small laptop that just you can see, and you make a change and say, that's great. That client has a different amount of investment in the process that's more transparent.
So just to jump in there, one of the other big benefits to the use of technology and what this slide is trying to show is that you can look at multiple things at the same time. So what you'll sometimes find with a client is if your intervention is supposed to change something at the pelvis, let's say, they're very aware that that's what you're looking at. And so they may hold themselves differently because they're thinking about the pelvis. But if you're taking a single capture that's able to look at ankle, knee, pelvis, shoulder, posture, all those things in one go, and the client knows that you're looking at all of those things, they're not going to focus on one thing and exaggerate a postural position or a technique that isn't natural to them. So hopefully it's also giving you an opportunity to sort of wipe out some of that I'm being observed, I'm going to hold myself in this way, and get towards something that's a better snapshot of what's actually happening.
Super. The more holistic a look we can take an individual, the better. So if we think about accuracy, again, if you look at some of the goniometer accuracy citations, if we're really, really kind to a goniometer, it's plus or minus 3%. But I've seen studies that it's plus or minus 6%, and that's in medical students after a year of studying anatomy. So goniometer and technologies like that, or technologies where you're not marking the joints, can impact accuracy. So basically, if you're plus or minus 3%, when we're looking at leg extension, that can be between 4 and 5 degrees of change in what's going to happen from an extension perspective. And given that our ranges for leg extension are relatively narrow, that potentially is the difference between being where you want them to be and not being where you want them to be. Also, if you look at that picture, a goniometer relies on you duplicating a movement. It relies on you duplicating their ankling pattern, and those muscles aren't active. And then you have to find joint centers. I always feel like when I'm forced to use a goniometer for leg extension, that I wish I had one extra set of hands to manipulate it. So it relies on you stopping them. It relies on the client having good posture in the saddle. There are a lot of limitations. So motion capture, if you have accurate marker placement, no matter what the iteration thereof, whether it's video, whether it's 3D, whether it's some of the other flavors of that, it can be accurate to a 1/10 of a degree. So at the end of the day, accuracy is important in a bike fit, as is the accuracy of the landmarks and everything else. Market expectations. We see this a lot. Customers often equate a high-end bike fit with fit equipment or with certain types of tools. So we'll regularly have clients say, I want a 3D fit, or I had a blah, blah, blah bike fit and it's this brand. And their perception is that we are operating that technology, but the technology in of itself is what's doing the hard lifting. So fitter competence may have become irrelevant in their mind, and they're shopping what you're doing for them based on technology. Now, this may be slightly more true in the US, and obviously if you have a great reputation and you have a following, it's less true. But like me, in my early days of fit, when I was using mainly static technologies, even though I was considered the go-to person in the area, as soon as somebody had a brighter, shinier toy, all of a sudden there were a lot of our clients that were very happy were drawn to a technology. And then I think if you're in the business of selling the solutions, one of the things, or you're a retailer, one of the things we have to be very careful of is that the fit business itself is obviously high value. If you don't have enough technology in their mind, you lose the fit business, you lose the accessory business, the saddles, the stems, the handlebars, you lose new bike business, or those more expensive bike fit purchases may go to somebody who's perceived as the best bike fitter in the area. If you're in retail or you're selling solutions, that means now that the happiness of your client, if you sell a product, is now in the hands of a third party. So if somebody insists that your 6 foot tall rider needs a 54 centimeter frame because that's going to make a very nimble crit bike, and they've got a 140 stem on there and their back and their neck and shoulders are killing them, and you've sold them the bike, now the happiness, or a large component of that happiness with the product you've sold them, is in somebody else's hands. So you could be a phenomenal fitter, you could be massively more gifted and efficient than the person that has more technology, but especially in inexperienced riders or riders that aren't a part of the community that knows you're a great fitter, you may lose that battle before it's even started. So when we think about market expectations, I also think about, what does a fit studio look like? And on the left-hand side here, this was the very first attempt that Trek and when we were consulting with them made on building a fit space. And what's kind of interesting about the fit space on the left-hand side is that all that is black paint, a little bit of drywall, a cheap toolbox, and a platform. So this wasn't expensive, but if a person is trying to compare what early 2000s fit studio looks like on the right hand side, where it's a trainer and a mat and a bunch of tools and you got the closeout wheels and you're on the mezzanine upstairs in a retail shop, the perception of the client is very different. So one environment communicates professionalism and it communicates precision. The other environment communicates, okay, are they working on bikes there, or is it a professional environment? So those expectations of service are definitely different depending on how you present yourselves, and the presentation of what you do is very important. So customer experience, and I can't emphasize how the experience is what's built our business. We have, a large six-figure amount of money in our business every year, year after year, growing every year. That's just fit services. So it's not a nut, a bolt, a stem, or a handlebar. And the reason that we consistently grow our fit business, the reason we have 3 fit studios, the reason we have 3 bike fitters, the reason we have Andy on staff as a sports scientist, is because we provide a superior experience. And that experience goes down to making sure that the technology does not overwhelm the bike fit. It doesn't drive anything. It doesn't make you a backseat technician. Technology, its role is to enhance and extend your senses and to facilitate better outcomes and to facilitate you giving a better experience to that customer. Technology primarily for us, and I'm not using that term lightly, technology for us is primarily a means of helping clients see, feel, and understand what a fitter is doing and that it's correct for them. Great fitters, in my opinion, or in our experience, they sit side by side with their clients and they share what those experiences are like. So here are some examples of working with clients, and we're sitting side by side with them, we're showing the data, we're showing them the information, and we're using those visual cues to engage with them. So it is massively powerful to be able to show that client themselves, their body, what's going on, what you're doing, and bringing them with you on a journey. So that expectation and that communication structure is very important. So the paradox of time savings, I remember when a certain very famous fit technology came out, there was gleeful enthusiasm at people being able to do a bike fit in an hour. And to me, being Irish and being all about hospitality and being all about giving people an experience, that to me seemed like we're totally missing the point. I have clients from 2000, from 2001, who still seek me out to buy bikes. Even when I was on the East Coast, I had clients fly to New York to get bike fits. Because fundamentally, fitting is an opportunity to sit side by side with a person, solve problems they have, and make them a better cyclist. And fit technology could be used to reduce the time, but a well-executed motion capture fit allows you to create space in the fit, to use that technology to create time to give a better experience. So if an accessory or a solution or something else is a part of that, you can build trust faster with that client because they see the why. And we talk all the time when we're doing fitter education is when your client knows the why behind what they're doing, they're much more likely to be open to what you're trying to accomplish with them. Create a loyal customer that will refer clients. Most of our business is from referrals. Most of our business is from word of mouth. So when that client understands what you're doing, you've been super transparent about it, you're in a great fit environment, you've got appropriate technology, this client really feels quite different. So when you find that perfect bike using a SciCycle or whatever technology you have, it makes a huge difference. So to kind of round all that up, great fitters use technology to engineer an amazing, transparent experience. So when you want to build trust and credibility with your clients, we see almost on a daily basis, clients will come in thinking they want X. They want this level of product, they want this level of something, or they just come in for a bike fit. And once they see the process and once they see how all these things feel in their body, once we say, listen, I'd love to take you off your SciCycle because this 44 centimeter bike, which is an example I had yesterday, with 165 millimeter cranks and your 62 centimeter saddle height, proportionately, that's not doing great things for this knee pain that you're experiencing, because the length of the crank, even though it's the shortest standard crank length, when we put you on a shorter crank, it's going to do amazing things for how your knees feel. And there were a whole bunch of other biomechanical things going on. But without a SciCycle or without technology, I can't put that person on a 145 crank and let them feel what's going on. So technology allows the rationale for your system, for your decisions to be more transparent. That client left purchasing a new bike. They had no intention of coming in, purchased cranks, purchased power meter, purchased a whole bunch of things that was never on their mind, because we were able to take them off a bike that they were miserable on, put them on a SciCycle, experience a different crank length, see a change in knee pain immediately, see a change in power, see a change in the angles that were producing some of the discomfort, and all of a sudden this client is excited about doing centuries again. Their initial objective was to come in and to be able to ride 30 miles pain-free. So that was not the situation prior to the bike fit. So very important. Record keeping. Customers who come back between 6 and 24 months in the future, they expect you to remember their fit. Now, if you're like me, if it's not a client I know personally or know well, there are times before they come in where I'm pulling up their video, I'm pulling up their fit sheet, I'm trying to remember exactly who the person was. Now, as soon as I see that, I remember a lot about the client. But when you have good technology, it really allows you to see where they were, who they are, what you found, what you did with their position. And it really allows you to stay, to see what informed your decisions in the past, why did you make the changes you made, and what effect did it have on what they were expecting. And sometimes, at the end of every fit in our record keeping, we make 5 recommendations. So, and some of those things would be as, hey, priority 1 would be increasing hamstring length. Some would be going and seeing your physio or physical therapist to get the following done. Sometimes we'll say, we believe in the future you'll need to consider a shorter crank. Your shoes are really worn out, you need footbeds, whatever those 5 things are. And maybe they're things we didn't accomplish in that session. But at the end of the fit, when you have that record keeping, when you have it side by side with video or pressure mapping or whatever technology that you have, it makes a huge difference to the credibility of what you're trying to explain to that client. And when they come back in, sometimes it's for a follow-up, and they say, well, I still have knee pain. When you're able to go back to your list of 5 things, and when you're able to have those 5 things be crystal clear that these are the 5 things, and by the way, 3 of those 5 things were really important for you not to have knee pain anymore. And I need you to start work on them, because bike fit is not 100%. Bike fit is not 100%. I'm going to move things on the bike. Sometimes you have to pay attention to what's going on with the off the bike stuff as well. So having all that record keeping is important. So what are our 3 stages of motion capture? And this is kind of something that's really important to know, is that we come up with recommended kinematic ranges, but really they're the training wheels of bike fit. They are they're safe ranges that we come up with based on scientific research, based on experience, and based on working with physical therapists to understand, in these cases, these kinematic ranges or these biomechanical ranges make sense. So obviously in a motion capture setting, or when we're capturing kinematic information about a client, what we have to do is be in a situation where we have ranges, we have somewhere to go to as a guideline or as a beginning step. Then oftentimes what we're going to do is we're kind of try and find the edge of the world. So what I mean by that is sometimes the best way to know you're in the right place is to go too far in one direction or the other. So you got to find that breaking point. So take the saddle too high, break it, take it too low, break it. Now we have two bookmarks that we know that the solution is somewhere in between. And then oftentimes finding the edge of the world is also useful when that client isn't responding to change, or you're not seeing linear responses like you'd expect. So sometimes you'll take them to an extreme of reach, an extreme of saddle height, an extreme of something else, because we need to get them to shift or make a change, and then we'll dial it back into a range where they are doing better. And then it's also, the motion capture is a super important means of engaging with the client. Andy, I'm going to have you chime in here a little bit too, because you're very big on our training wheels analogy, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I created this slide because I kind of think this is how, this is almost the fitter's career progression through the use of motion capture. When you first start fitting with motion capture, you'll learn where to place those markers, and the supplier of that motion capture, or the people who've taught you how to use it, will say, right, this is the knee angle you want. And obviously those knee angles are dependent on the marker set that they've taught you to use. They're not transferable, and a couple of different manufacturers use different marker sets. So it is important to use the right recommended range for the marker set that you've been taught to use. But basically it's a method of getting you to a relatively competent fit quite quickly. So it's not perfect, it's not individual optimization. It is a range that has been shown to reduce risk of injury in the general population. So it's training wheels. It's trying to get you using a bike, riding around without falling off and hurting yourself. And that's why that analogy is kind of used there. So it's recommended ranges are to get you up fitting, to get you offering services without risk of really causing any long-term damage. The next stage is you develop and realize that actually those recommended ranges don't work for some types of customer. That's when you move on to finding the edge of the world. So as Porrick described it, you go too high, you go too low, and you find the point that it breaks. And when you first start doing that, you'll need to move a long way because you'll be less sensitive to those changes where a more experienced fitter would identify that, yeah, that's broken because this has happened, or not broken, but the saddle is now too high because I can see this change. Where when you're first doing it, you might need to go a bit higher still to really exaggerate that change. Technology will help you start to hone in on those changes and see them sooner, because you can measure them, so you can measure those small changes. But basically it's giving you that fit window. So let's take saddle height. If this is our maximum and this is our minimum, then we know that somewhere in between will work fine. And then the stage after that, once you've found that individual fit window, the career development as the next stage is engaging the client in the fit process. So show them the why is kind of, why have you made that change? What has it done to them? So it's not just a case of, right, this is where it was bad and this is where it was bad and anywhere in the middle is fine. That third and final stage is kind of like, well, I think we need to go a little bit lower on your saddle, and this is the reason why. And then the technology allows you to support that decision-making process, but also to kind of to show every stage through that fit, through the changes, where you were when you started, where you were after the change, why it was beneficial or why it wasn't beneficial, and why you're going on to make another change. So they're the kind of three stages. And I think if you look at fitters and you look at the service they offer, that does kind of fit in with how experienced the fitter is. And if they're just focusing on recommended ranges, it's because they're early career fitters and they've not learned the next stage yet. Then somebody teaches them how to find that window, and then they go on from there and start supporting their decisions and making small changes and being able to measure and identify why they're doing it, and what optimal is. So it's a progression through those stages to achieve an optimal and individual fit by the end of it.
I just wanted to say one additional thing on that is that stage 3 is when you're able to very competently take your physical assessments, take your interview, and weave the other components of the bike fit seamlessly into how you figure out where and to you're going to be, and then what you use as a tool to engage that client in the process, and a lot of times motivate them to do different things. So motivate them to fix some of the off the bike things, motivate them to understand that, well, listen, the impetus for you sitting crooked, twisting your spine, rotating forward on one side, back on the other side, changing your knee tracking, is the saddle, is the lack of core strength, is the inability to stabilize on the left side, but you can apparently do it on the right side. It's all of those things. So in stage 3, you're pulling in a very holistic, multifaceted engagement strategy that culminates in technology, but you're pulling it in from other areas. So that's part of that. So what's the formula for a great bike fit? So we're huge on education. We believe education is the foundation for you creating a better outcome for your clients. Creating a fit protocol that isn't just your comfort zone. So some people are really comfortable with feet and maybe sometimes almost spend too much time on the foot, as I did at stages in my career. Some people are very comfortable because they're a personal trainer on the physical assessment side and all the, rehabilitation components and exercise prescriptions. Some people are very strong in technology, but really a good fit protocol means you're a generalist. You shouldn't be super strong at one thing and focus on one thing. You should have a more holistic protocol, that you have a great interview, great physical assessment, great initial assessment on the bike in terms of kinematics and contact points, and then all those things stitched together. And the one thing I would say about fit protocol is it has to be the same all the time. I know a lot of paratrooper bike fitters, and a paratrooper bike fitter is somebody who, parachutes into the biggest problem area and tries to fix that. Whereas the more mature fitter is going to know that a component of knee pain is understanding the physical assessment, understanding, where the pain starts, what it stops, what makes it better, what makes it worse. So that's the interview. And then understands that, cleat position, saddle height, saddle posture, all of those things need to be addressed before you get in. You dig in and say, okay, what's going on in the frontal plane? So the protocol needs to be the protocol, and it's executed the same all the time. The paratrooper bike fitters that come in times of crisis and try and fix one thing, generally that's not a sustainable way to build a business. Your fit environment is super important. How the customers feels about where they're sitting, how clean your restrooms are, all those things are important. High EQ, the communication style and protocol, or what Mark Timmerman, who's the sports science advisor for Trek, he's a sports medicine doctor, and he talks about your bike side manner. So if you're a doctor, we talk about your bedside manner. Bike side manner is super important, and technology helps you with that. So when you can stitch all the pieces together, use your skills as a communicator and communicate more efficiently, that's very important. And then technology is the final piece. That can deliver world-class fit outcomes and a great customer experience. And remember that even if you're not delivering the perfect outcome, if they've had a great experience and you've created a great rapport with the person, you're going to get that client back to work with them some more. So the next slide talks about the types of technology, and there are two types in general that we see for motion capture. So video capture, or two-dimensional capture, i.e. we're capturing we're capturing a single side of the body at a time. The one thing I'd say about video capture is that there is a massive difference between 30 frames per second and 60 frames per second. At 30 frames per second, you tend to see blurring. You're taking large chunks of the pedal stroke and missing it. And when you're trying to do something like maximum extension, sometimes you'll be advancing it, and I've missed it. So when you go to, I would recommend at least 60 frames per second, so as you can find the points in the pedal stroke that you want to analyze. Resolution is a key thing. So A Logitech C920 camera, which I see a lot of people use for fit, does not have adequate resolution, doesn't have adequate frame rate to do accurate analysis. One of the downsides of 2D analysis, we have some scientific level cameras that a 3-second video clip is 1 gigabyte file. So we, in one of our studios, we have about 50 terabytes of archive video. So when you deal with very high resolution cameras, you get massive file sizes. So it's something that you need to consider. The big thing with 2D is setup. And this thing here is we're analyzing a single plane. And if you're not very anal retentive about how you set up your camera and how the axis of each plane of analysis is oriented to the camera, you're not going to do a great job. We've done a webinar on video analysis, which, Andy, was that a free or was that a paid webinar?
Yeah, it was one of the free ones, so it's available on YouTube.
So on our YouTube channel, you can see how to set up a camera analysis space. We can get, very similar outcomes to what any 3D system can because of the way we control our 2D analysis. 3D is often used to measure joint angles. 3D is kind of reference in the biomechanics research world. The frame rate is often low, but can be hundreds of frames per second depending on the system. So in a clinical or research setting, the frame rates are up in the hundreds, 120 frames per second, partly because they analyze other sports. In the retail setting, there are some systems that are only 16 or 18 hertz, which is, capturing 30-degree slices of the pedal stroke. The big thing with motion 3D that 2D struggles with is its automatic data capture. So if you do an analysis over X period of time, when you finish that analysis, you have an average leg extension, you have an average knee position relative to the pedal axle, you get data and it's encapsulated in a report immediately. The data sizes are small because it's spitting out very small data files. It can be multi-camera, but it's also expensive. So a 3D system typically starts somewhere in the $10,000 to $15,000 range, depending on what you want to do. Your range of cost for 2D is much closer to, a system start as little as $2,000. We have a $2,000 2D system available. So big order of magnitude of cost difference. 2D system makes you work harder to get the data, but it's a fraction of the cost. And from a customer experience standpoint, it eclipses what 3D can do because the person can see their body, but it is more time consuming. So let's look at some new technology. So in a future world, I think we'll see a lot more use of what are called IMUs, or inertial measurement units. And these are essentially small sensors that use a combination of accelerometers, goniometers, and some really cool technology that allow us to attach multiple IMUs to the body to calculate what's happening. The other nice thing about IMUs is they're also capable of looking at axial movement. So if you think about the femur like a rod that twists as you pedal, that's something that a 2D system struggles to capture. So, or sorry, 2D or 3D struggles to capture. And very good at digitizing and understanding what's happening with pelvic movement. They can be used outdoors. These particular ones, we have a system based on this technology that you can do. You could attach these to somebody, trigger them to record to themselves, and you get up to 8 hours of data outdoor analysis. So that can be huge, huge, huge asset. The challenge with them at this point is that they're very prone to magnetic interference. So bikes that are made of metal, any sort of metal items on a bike can create analysis issues. The nice thing is that they can conduct analysis in almost any environment. The hard thing is it relies on them staying in place and staying stable. So sometimes it involves straps and things to have on the body, which can feel awkward. And the good ones are expensive. We have a research grade system that we use for run gauge analysis, and we're talking closer to $30,000 for a system, which has its applications and uses. There are consumer-based systems on the market like Leomo, but they're not nearly as sophisticated, and there are much less sensors used. For example, to analyze just lower body in a research grade system, it's between 7 and 9 IMUs just for lower body. So the good ones are expensive, and they have some limitations. Pressure mapping. So pressure in general terms is force divided by surface area. The hard thing sometimes with pressure mapping is that, you know, it does rely on you having quite a bit of education. So if you look in this slide here, you can see that kind of squiggle and a red line. So that squiggle, or that little movement around on the nose of the saddle that you can see there, that's called the center of pressure. And the shapes of that and the planes it moves in can be tremendously useful. But there are some subjective elements to this too, in the sense that, you know, this could be absolutely no problem for one client, but because of the nerve routing or blood supply, given that we're all very different, anatomically, somebody could have a nerve or a vein or an artery in an area that would the pressure map from this particular slide would be very problematic. So the range of pressures that can cause issues are large. However, if somebody's having pain in a certain part of the saddle and you can see that it's 1,000 millibars, the chances are if you take it from 1,000 millibars down to 700 millibars, that person's going to experience some symptom relief. So with pressure mapping, you have to marry their subjective feedback with the objective data that you're gathering, because after all, it is the existence of pressure. It doesn't tell us anything about anatomy or the structures underneath. So it opens up an insight into something you can't see or feel, and it helps you get away from that bias that's sometimes introduced by my saddle is fine, I have this saddle for 10 years. And really what it is their baseline of pain or discomfort is distorted. And what we use this extensively for is to see is their pain or discomfort baseline accurate or not. The other thing it can help us see is leg length discrepancies, saddle height too high, hitches, people that hips are hitching. It can show us sacroiliac joint dysfunction. You can see how the pelvis is interacting with the saddle. There's a lot of other things that allow us to do. And for TT and for triathlon, it really gives us a very good indication of whether they're going to be able to stay in that position or not. And this is also in our aero seminar, there is a correlation between the center of pressure stability and aerodynamics. And if anybody wants to see those slides, Daniel and the folks at GBMICE did a wonderful study on that. So force pedals. Andy is the expert on force pedals because he's using them for his PhD. Andy, would you like to talk through this slide?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but it's a very new technology in terms of it being used in bike fitting. We've all seen sort of diagrams looking like the one on the right hand side of this slide showing the direction and magnitude of force. So basically, the longer the arrow, the greater the amount of force, and obviously the direction that the arrow points is the direction that the force is being applied. You can also see there a little flat line that represents the angle of the pedal. So when you combine the crank position, the pedal angle, and the direction of force, you get some really, really powerful data. So the key thing here is that force pedals are very different to power meter-based pedals or pedal-based power meters. A pedal-based power meter is just going to give you a power output. Some of them try to give a little bit more data, but as to whether or not they can accurately give the same level of data that a true force pedal would give, they're probably not that close. So for reference, the pedals that I'm using for research currently retailed at about 18,000 euros, somewhere around there. So this is not a cheap technology. The reason we're trying to sort of highlight it today is I think it's one of the technologies that in 5-10 years, when that price point comes down, you're really going to see this as a powerful tool for bike fitting. And one of the reasons for that is that it can help you identify the directional forces of the pedal, but also the directional forces of the pedal reaction forces. So if you think about every force has an equal and opposite, as you push against something, it resists you, and it resists you in an equal magnitude, so an equal amount, but also an opposite direction. So if you look at the, let me bring up the little pointer. So if we look down the bottom of this diagram here, then this rider is pushing almost vertically, but ever so slightly backwards, where through the 9 o'clock position, they're pushing slightly forwards. So at that point, you're going to get a, let me draw it on. So if you imagine equal and opposite, then that's going to be your pedal reaction force. So it's pushing up, but it's also pushing backwards. Where down here, it's pushing you slightly forwards. I'm exaggerating because it's hard to draw with a mouse. But if you can measure the direction of the force, and you can make adjustments that make that force, especially when somebody is not stable on the saddle, then you can help them have a pedal reaction force that pushes their body weight backwards and up, makes the position more sustainable, makes the saddle stability better. There's lots of things that can be improved through bike fit by measuring the pedal forces and the direction of those forces. Another key aspect of this, which we've not put on the slide, is if they're 3-directional. So if you imagine sort of creating this kind of shape with your fingers, then we're very used to two-dimensional concepts. So you know, the X and the Y, but the Z, which is the depth in the concept, in the case of pedals, is sort of side to side. If we can reduce that, because that's not propelling anybody forwards, you can push as hard as you want to the side of the pedal, and it's not going to turn the pedal around, or turn the crank around rather. So if we can make some adjustments, whether it's wedging, whether it's stance width, all those kinds of things, to reduce that wasted force in the Z plane, the lateral pushing out to the sides, then we can make the rider more efficient. So all of these things are aspects of the fit that we can't measure with any of our sort of traditional tools or methods. We can infer them potentially by maybe wear marks on shoes or cleats or things like that, but without measuring them, we don't know whether we've changed them, we don't know whether we've made a positive difference. So I think force pedals are one of those things where currently it's not super easy to get hold of them and to use them in a retail fit environment, but it's one to keep an eye on, because I think they're coming in a big way in the future.
Super. I would like to do an honorable mention too on, we do use the pressure sensors in the shoes that, that are provided by GBMized, which give us some gross force and gross torque information, which can be massively helpful in understanding where a person is pushing. So a power meter is a very blunt tool in terms of understanding what's happening. So, one level of insight is when at the current price point, if they were available, would be $14,000 to $20,000 for a force pedal. But, for a fraction of that, you can get some force and pressure insights using the GBMized technology, which we use when we need to understand how a person is pushing or what's happening and where. So let's move on to EMG. So EMG, or electromuscle myography, is a very, very powerful tool that we can use to understand what's happening in terms of muscle signaling. I think the thing to remember is, and it's in the first point here, is it doesn't measure the muscle creating force, or doesn't measure muscle force. It measures the electrical signal coming to muscle telling it to do something. So it doesn't really measure it firing or the timing and the recruitment, but it does give you an idea as to what's happening with the signals to turn a muscle on. This is something we've used quite a bit with athletes in return to play. It's not something that we use on a daily basis. It is something that we use outside resources to do, and it can be helpful, but it is quite expensive. And to be perfectly honest, every time I use it, I think I understand something about it, and then the EMG expert will give a bunch of insights that I'm like, whoa, where did that? Okay. So it is a difficult thing to use and to use well, but there are technologies coming in where they're embedded into clothing and other types of sensors. And, there is one in particular that is embedded into a cycling short, which has some potential, but I think in general, Andy and I think that it's not quite ready for prime time yet. The technology is old and well established, but it's not an easy to get into and use technology given its complexity. And then the last point there is that it does require some post-processing. So you could spend a lot of time analyzing the data, which means you have a client kind of sitting around. So it's not well paired with a bike fit situation. It is well paired with, you know, a medical professional using it and using it over time to see improvements or rehab gains.
Yeah, so I just wanted to jump in here as well, because so this picture on the right hand side is my research that I'm doing currently in the university lab. So these are the EMG sensors, and what you'll see is this was one of the few photos I took before we strapped them up. So one of the issues you have with an EMG sensor like this is it's got a decent amount of weight to it. So if you imagine, it's less of an issue with cycling, but if they were to be running or jumping, every time they hit the floor, the flesh obviously jolts a little bit and it moves around, and the weight of that sensor can often pull it loose. So what we do is you see these straps higher up on the reflective marker plates. We wrap the entire leg in those to keep those sensors still, to stop them flapping around. And what I'm using them for in this project is really one of the best ways that you can use it, which is identifying muscle firing patterns and timings. So by synchronizing this with the 3D motion capture system, you can see the reflective markers on there as well. All of that data is collected on the same computer. So it's time-stamped exactly the same, and I can tell exactly where through the pedal stroke those muscles are switching on and switching off. In this instance, we're just using 4 sensors. There's 2 that you can't see here. This is the lateral gastroc, the medial gastroc there, and then around the front you would be able to see the soleus and the tibialis anterior. So all I'm trying to do is get a very broad understanding of when that muscle fires, and then we're making some interventions and seeing if it changes when the muscle becomes active. But what you could use it for in a bike fit situation is something that Chris Balzer uses over here in the US, to put these sensors on both sides or you know, left and right at the same time, and look for asymmetries. So if the muscle fires on the right leg much sooner than on the left leg, you know that there's some kind of recruitment issue there, that something isn't quite right. So there's an additional piece that could come with this technology, and those shorts that Porrick mentioned do offer the potential for that in the future. The difficulty with the shorts is that do you want to go to a bike fit and wear some sweaty shorts that you know 50 other people have used before you got there? Obviously they're going to be washed, but it's still not super appealing to your client. So I think there's maybe a little way to go with that, but it's getting close, definitely.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that the questions that always get asked with this is, well, great, I know something's switching on, but is it pushing? And I think part of if we were to take a force pedal and combine it with EMG, now you have 2 systems that kind of cross-correlate each other. So if we know somebody has a weakness, and we can look at the signal coming, we know in general where muscles fire. If it's an asymmetry, it's a little easier because we can look at the other side of the body and go, okay, gastroc is recruiting, your VMO is turning on. And then if it's different on the other side, then we can kind of use those things to cross-correlate. Well, what force are we losing when we see this muscle has a weaker signal and it's not necessarily turning on? So it generally, and that's the power of the study that Andy's doing for his PhD, is he's using both technologies simultaneously. So, the signal it's great, the muscle's getting signal, but is it exerting force? I mean, ultimately, that's what we care the most about as bike fitters. So together with other things, it can be quite powerful. So this is an area we spend a lot of time working in and we're very passionate about is aerodynamic assessments. So obviously going to a wind tunnel, which is our left-hand side thing, can be super helpful. We have an aero studio here at Cyclologic that we use in teaching, but we also use it in analysis. So you can see with the green screen technology from BioRacer or virtual wind tunnel, we primarily use it not to calculate, super accurate CDAs. We use it as a posture coaching tool. And we know from all the scientific literature that reducing frontal area can be massively influential in doing that. But we also know from the data from GBMIs and other companies that if we can make them stable, give them good biomechanics, and give them a position that's sustainable with low frontal area, we know that the cross correlation of those factors can be amazing. We're also doing some research with Notio, which is the sensor you see in the middle, to do analysis outside in the field. So the Notio will transmit a live CDA to your Garmin. So when we send this client out post wind tunnel, we can have them refine or find that position again using live CDA feedback from the Notio. And it, in conjunction with Golden Cheat and some of the custom analysis they've built, has tremendous applications for race planning and all those other performance-oriented parameters. So NIRS, or near infrared spectroscopy. This is something that Andy and I have spent a little bit of time recently looking into, and we're quite excited about it as a technology. But basically what it does is it estimates blood oxygenation levels. So it fires a near infrared light into the muscle, and if the returning light or the sensor detects the differences between high oxygen and low oxygen situations. We actually did a nice guinea pig test on Andy where we made his position progressively more aggressive, and we could see at a certain point that the muscle oxygenation changed significantly. And then we modified the position, we could see the blood flow characteristics into a muscle group change. So this could have a lot of implications for TT positions. I think the greatest weakness with NIRS as a technology is that the software is quite weak right now. So it's something we're closely watching. It's something we'll look into again in the future. For us, it has value, but there's how often we would use it versus what it costs and the weaknesses of the software. It's not that you couldn't use it. It's not that it doesn't have value. It's just a question of, with any technology, it's all about return on investment. So breathing mechanics, we're a big fan of, everybody talks about in bike fit that, hey, it's important you're able to breathe. But for me, that was never kind of a satisfying statement. So we've been using Zephyr technology now for nearly 10 years. And basically what it does is it allows you to take a look at what happens to your breathing mechanics when you change. So this will give us a torso angle. It'll give us an overall accelerometry or stability picture of what's going on with the torso. We'll combine that with saddle data. But, we have to be careful that you don't create a low drag position that massively influences breath rate. So if you take somebody who had threshold in a stable position, with good drag or appropriate drag numbers for the application, i.e. a 4 kilometer pursuit drag number is different to an Ironman drag number, or your targets for what that would be different. But at the end of the day, if a change you've just made increases the breath rate significantly, you may have decreased the amount of power they can produce or sustain aerobically. So if you're dealing with an event that's 40 kilometers long and you've made it more difficult to get oxygen to your muscles, you've actually reduced their threshold power at that point. So when we're doing aerodynamic analysis or when we're doing interventions on the track or in the wind tunnel, we're always using a device that looks at breath rate and looks at heart rate and looks at HRV. And we combine those things together to make sure that this aerodynamic gain that we've just achieved isn't being negated by us messing up their breathing. And here you can see it on one of the Trek Segafredo riders. You can see there's a bulge on the left-hand side of his chest. On the right-hand side of the picture, that's the sensor that you can see that gathers all that data. So when I'm at the track, I'll actually sit there while I'm seeing their power data. I see all their aero data, and then I'm seeing all that data streaming to me live on their breath rate and all of their torso angle and how stable they are. And then the future, what's coming? So smart garments. We have a smart garment project we're working on right now that is quite exciting, but a lot of this stuff is in, it's kind of still in a somewhat embryonic state. So this is a system of, you know, having a technology with pressure sensors, temperature sensors, heart rate sensors. There isn't really there's large scale funding for the individual elements, but nobody's done a great job yet putting this together. This is actually one of the things we have to pay attention to as bike fitters, because people are going to critique what we do based on what we call prosumer level tech, like this stuff here. Well, my, you know, smart suit told me that this got worse or this got better. So we have to be a little bit wary of this technology because it's not really scientific grade. You know, if you're integrating it into a garment, it's not placed the same in everybody. There's also some lactate proxy measurement stuff and some other NIRS technologies that can be integrated. So this is coming. There's some really neat things happening in this space, but it's a little bit immature as a technology right now. So what we have to be careful of with these technologies is that how do we use these type of technologies to solve problems? So if we look at that bottom example there, if we want to look at breathing mechanics, how do we balance breathing mechanics with aerodynamics? So if you're a 4K pursuiter, the 0.02 or 3 difference is huge. Aidan just made a comment that DCU is working on a lot of garment tech. And before them, there was a group called Clarity based out of, I think it was actually DCU as well, that I met with nearly 10 years ago that were working in garment technology. And some of that, you know, ended up getting converted into technology that Under Armour bought, but a lot of it is still being developed. So that's cool. They're still working on that. So for breathing mechanics, there is a connection to aerodynamics. So that's obviously important. But if we think about some of the other things here, when we think of the other types of problems, what we have to think about as bike fitters is what type of technology solve what type of problems. So if we think about motion capture in 2D and 3D, that'll help us with movement pattern problems. It'll help us identify asymmetries. Asymmetries are also connected to aerodynamics because asymmetries introduce extra movement on the saddle. So it may have an increase in breathing mechanics because we load the diaphragm differently. So here we have all these things kind of cross-correlating. If we think about IMUs, they're going to help us do movement patterns, but mocap can also help us do that. IMUs can also help us with saddle discomfort because it can accurately animate what's happening with the pelvis. Similarly, IMUs can help us identify asymmetries. So we start to see this web of things. We think about pressure mapping. That's going to help us with saddle discomfort. It's going to help us with asymmetries. It's going to help us with foot pain. May actually help us with power differential as well. It'll help us with numb hands. So if we go down the list and look at force pedals, what's that going to help us with? It'll help us with asymmetries, power differentiation. If we keep going, what's EMG going to help us with? Well, that's going to help us with asymmetries, power differentiation, and movement pattern. So go down to NIRS again, that's going to help us with asymmetries, power differentiation, and foot pain. And our aerodynamic assessments, you know, are going to help us obviously with aerodynamics. So we can see we have this spider webs of technologies that can overlap different things, and some technologies help us identify more items than others. So for me, the two technologies we use the most are motion capture, 2D and 3D, and pressure mapping. We have IMU technologies. We have some force data from GBMized. We have EMG or access to EMG. We have access to NIRS if we want it. But for you as a bike fitter, you got to decide which tools make sense for the type of problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, so I think the key thing for me in creating this, and obviously that list of technology is not exhaustive, neither are the list of problems or things that you may want to look at. But at the moment, we don't have anything that directly allows us to measure back pain in our clients. We also have a lot of overlap with these technologies, but the the big thing is that none of them on their own can do everything. So anyone who tells you, you know, oh, our technology will do all of these things, they're probably exaggerating what their system is capable of at best, and flat out lying at worst. But the key take home is that most technology manufacturers are going to tell you about the strengths of their system. They're not necessarily going to tell you about the things it can't do. So to go away, read things like this, really identify what systems should be used to answer what questions. And another easy way of doing this is to look at the scientific research. So if people are looking at saddle discomfort and how it correlates with anything really, what measurement tools are they using? Are they using saddle pressure mapping? Probably more than likely. But if they're not going to be using video capture, for example. It might be alongside the pressure mapping, but it's not going to be the primary tool that they would be looking at for that purpose. So this is really just identify the tool that will give you the answer and the information that you need, because there isn't one thing that will do everything. I think the key things that we use often, that we see a lot, are some of those systems with, you know, 3 or 4 lines coming out of them. So pressure mapping has got 4 there. That's why we're so such big fans of it here. And motion capture, although it maybe only links over to 2, there's also an aspect of kind of ranking those problems or things that you want to look at. And actually movement patterns on the bike is probably one of the biggest and first things that we want to look at. So something that allows us to look at that, something that allows us to see a little bit more of the picture would be very good complementary technologies. So a motion capture system of some kind and a pressure mapping system go hand in hand very, very well.
Awesome. So let's chat about kind of a summary. You know, we're trying to build a library of tools for you to learn, you know, while we're experiencing what we're experiencing right now. So you'll start to see through our paid channels and free channels that there's more and more information out there for you. We'd love to be part of your educational or technical solutions. We are a resource for the industry and look forward to helping you in any way you can. Andy, I'll let you talk about what's coming up next.
Yeah, so on Monday we've got a webinar on cycling shoe design. So as a title, that's possibly not as inclusive as the webinar will be. We're going to cover the different components of a shoe, the different areas and aspects of a shoe, how the design or the style of the shoe can help you decide what's optimal for your customer, and some of the aspects that are going to be causing discomfort in others. So it's not the case that any shoe is, you know, good or any shoe is bad. It's very individual, so it's good for that client or bad for that client. So that webinar is really going to run through all the different variables that are going to help you identify which shoe is going to work better for the individual. Then next Friday, we've got bike fit versus cycling analysis. So one of the things we're keen on here is the use of the phrase cycling analysis. So we don't offer bike fit services, we offer cycling analysis services. And one of the big differences there is the sort of the level of analysis, the technologies involved, and sort of the data that we're gathering and processing and that side of things. So that webinar is going to run through the common ground between the two, but also the differences and which we think you should be using in your services. From the week after that, we're going to switch to just one webinar per week. So it'll be Friday the 12th of June that will be the next one after. If there's any subjects that you want us to cover, please give us a shout and let us know. We'll announce what that topic will be closer to the time. And as always, if you're interested in doing some one-on-one education that can cover any topic you want, just let us know, and we can do that as well. My email address is there, so you can get in touch, and that'll probably be an ongoing thing that will run for quite a while. So yeah, just get in touch and let us know what you want to learn about, either through these webinars or through one-on-one training, and we'll do our best to fulfill those needs. On the right hand side there, those are the top right is the YouTube videos that are already uploaded. All of our free webinars we're trying to put onto YouTube so that they're accessible for free ongoing. The bottom right, they're the webinars that are paid, and they're available to purchase on Vimeo as well. So if you've missed any of our previous webinars, they are available in one form or other to still watch. So yeah, thanks for attending today. And if you have any questions, please shout up, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Thanks, Aidan. Have a great weekend yourself too. Get out in the mountains, and hopefully you're not on super lockdown anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So I think with things starting to ease and people returning to work, the numbers at these webinars are starting to decline a little. But you know, we're keen to keep them going for a little bit longer. So keep an eye out for the future webinars and announcements, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. If you do have any questions after the webinar, my email address is there. Just send them over, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Take care, everybody.